Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. My guest in this episode is Chris Whelan. Chris has over 20 years of industry experience in a variety of roles, mostly in the product development environment. In this conversation, we are focusing on the state of the art, what it is, why it proves to be challenging, and what are some of the practical tips you can use to define state of the art for your medical device in the design and development phase. We had this conversation in front of a live audience as part of our weekly LinkedIn live audio series. You're about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining our weekly Let's Talk Risk conversation. We are going to have a very interesting conversation today about state of the art, which seems simple on surface to me at least, and has been very challenging to understand and use it in practice. So with that, guys, I'm really excited to welcome Chris Whelan today. Chris, in my mind, is a real practitioner. So he has come through design and development background and knows a lot about quality regulatory, has worked really hands-on in this space. So I'm very excited to learn from Chris about what his views are on state of the art, how best to use it. But let me first welcome Chris. Chris, welcome to our conversation today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Naveen. I've been looking forward to this.
Wonderful. Chris, so let's start by, just having you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your career journey.
Sure. So, I started in design and development, industrial design, and just fell into medical device development as one of my first jobs. That was about 20 years ago. And over those years, I've worked at a couple of small design consultancies for short amounts of time. So I've got a real good perspective on the design side of things. And in the last 10 years or so, I've really started to be able to focus 100% on the medical device aspects. And in those 20 years, I'm sure most of the community will agree that there's been a lot of changes, and the way we apply things has sort of come under more scrutiny, and especially with the MDR and IVDR, a lot of things have changed. So, my knowledge has evolved fairly rapidly, and sort of that's really exciting because it helps to make you feel confident that you're providing great things out to patients and users. So now I'm in charge of new product development at my place of work, and so this is a topic close to my heart.
Perfect. And state of the art as a term or a concept is also new from a risk management point of view in our industry, right? It has been defined very recently. So let's dig into that. Just to set the stage first, let's talk very briefly about what state of the art means in the context of device risk management.
Yeah, good start. And you're right, it did appear in the 2019 version, and it's well defined there. And the way I look at state of the art is there are sort of two main areas we need to consider. And one of them is just, what are people doing? What is the best practice? And the other area is standards. So when we talk about state of the art, we've got those two sort of slightly differently defined forms of state of the art. But the important thing is, and as we discussed earlier, Naveen, the stumbling block is that state of the art for medical device development is not the same as what state of the art is in consumer electronics, for example. So where the layperson would hear state of the art and think the latest technology, the leading edge, it's actually quite different to medical device development. State of the art is really just what is the common and accepted level of safety or level of performance that is required from these products. And that's defined by what is being done in clinical practice or in lab practice or in scientific practice.
Mm-hmm. So
we may have
So basically what I'm hearing you say is that it's not an absolute measure or an absolute term. It depends on what you're working with. And to my mind, it seems like it's connected to somehow the intended use. So if that comes first, then you begin to figure out what state of the art might mean to you. Does that sound about like the right way of thinking about it?
I think it does. I think that's pretty good. One thing I would add is that in terms of sort of a defined standard of what state of the art is, when we're talking about clinical practice, that's when it is a little bit fuzzy. But when we talk about that other section, which is our standards and our processes that are published by ISO, IEC, etc., that's where we do get a really good definition of what standard with a lowercase s is for state of the art, because it's well defined there. It's agreed by international experts in the field. So that's really good for us as medical device professionals, is that we do have those standards there that are very specifically setting what is expected and what is the state of the art. On the other side, as you said, when we're talking about clinical practice or lab practice, it does get a little bit fuzzy, and that's where we need to find other ways to support our decision about what state of the art is.
Great. So you're describing basically two aspects of state of the art. And what I'm reading between the lines here is that one is on the engineering side. When you are developing product from a technology or engineering point of view, you have these standards you can rely on. But when it gets to actually be used in a clinical environment, there we have some uncertainty or some ambiguity about what state of the art might be, right? I'm thinking in my mind like a clinical state of the art. Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, that's a good summary. Yeah.
Okay, so let's peel this further a little bit. Is it possible for you to maybe share an example where you were dealing with a situation and you had to define what the state of the art was for you?
Yep. So there is actually a project we're working on at the moment. Obviously, I won't give away too many details. But we've identified, so this is now in the context of the US market. We are going to Europe as well, but just for this discussion, when you look at your product code on the FDA website, you'll get a couple of recognized consensus standards listed there. So once we identified our product code, we went straight to the product code, and very clearly we could see what are the recognized consensus standards. So what are the state of the art that the FDA accepts for this product area? Now, our product does struggle a little bit to fit in with this product code, in the sense that if we look at the other products in that product code, there's some differences. It's substantially equivalent, but I mean, that's the principle of substantially equivalent, is it's not exactly the same. So we have these other characteristics of our product where it would benefit from some state of the art. Now, our product does have some kind of syringe aspect to it. So the syringe product code is FMG. So we go to FMG and we say, well, what are the state of the art that the FDA recognizes for syringes? And we can add that into our development process as state of the art. So we've kind of had to look around and say, all right, well, what other characteristics of our product might have some kind of guidance or some kind of classification somewhere else, and we can combine them. And then that's, of course, in addition to this, the general state of the art that the FDA, it doesn't publish under the product code. It just publishes in the recognized consensus standards database. So that's where we're looking at those sort of technical ones, or the engineering ones, as you put them, Naveen. Mm-hmm. In terms of the clinical aspects, this is really where the usability testing or the human factors comes alive to identify what state of the art is. Because going through that process with our users and our potential customers, we say, what are people doing? What do they think is acceptable, especially in terms of identifying use error? So an example might be, cleaning a sampling port that's on a patient arterial pressure monitoring line. Do we expect the user to do that every time? What do they do? What risk mitigation is their practice applying? And then what does that leave left for us on our device to handle in terms of risk mitigation and state of the art?
Interesting. I want to emphasize this point again and make sure it's not lost. I mean, you are giving us a great tip for the technical or engineering side. find the product code, go to FDA's website, find the consensus standards. That's so straightforward and simple. But you're also making a point that don't ignore the other characteristics of your product or device or the system itself that may not be covered by that product code, and expand your thinking a little bit, right? So that's a very key point to emphasize. The question here I have, Chris, is at what point in your design and development would you start doing this?
Well, the answer, as usual, is as soon as possible, Naveen. But if we're going to take the FDA product code approach, then obviously you need to be confident with that, and that may be you may be very confident with your own internal evaluation. You may wait until after you've done a Q-sub to determine what that is, and then you can lock it in. But even before that point, most people, they have an idea of what characteristics or what kind of technological characteristics maybe their product is going to have. And so a little bit of research, you can find out what are the state-of-the-art or the recognized consensus standards that are likely to apply. And then you can start looking through those and say, well, can I achieve the things that are laid out here from the technical side, from the usability side, or not from just usability, but from the user interface side? What are the constraints? Who are the people I'm working with? What is their state-of-the-art when it comes to clinical practice? So you don't need full definitions inside your product specification to start, but that does help, because you don't want to do too much, but you also don't want to miss out on things that are going to help you, especially through your regulatory process, or even just things that you didn't realize were essential for safety and performance of your product.
Got you. So before I start inviting folks, I have one more question for you, and that relates to, again, the clinical side, which, I just want to set the stage also for our discussion. As I think about it, let's say even just consider the U.S. market. Like, let's go one geography. But U.S. is also not homogeneous, right? East Coast, West Coast, North, South. Medical practice might be different in one area of the country versus the other. When you are thinking about the state of the art in the clinical environment, are you thinking about standard of care? Is there some similarity between the two, or these are two different concepts?
In my mind, they are very similar. Standard of care, that's the part I think that can vary across the board. Standard of care is often driven by some of those more technical state-of-the-art. So you've got CLSI and various other organizations that publish, here's the best practice. But that doesn't mean that people are doing it. It's just like a standard. It's not regulation. It's just best practice. So yes, you definitely consider it. And then you also consider, what am I saying with my product? What is my objective? What is my mission with my product? Do I just want to meet just the lowest threshold? Or am I out there to actually improve healthcare for people? Yeah.
Well, I think the thought that comes to my mind here, Chris, is if we look at it from the standard of care perspective, we can go sort of engage with many professional societies like American Medical Association. These are the places where people are setting best practices, standard of care, and we may learn a little bit more about the environment in which our devices would be used. Would that make sense for us to consider during our design and development phase?
Makes perfect sense, Naveen, and that's what I would recommend too, is that wherever you know that there's a standard or a guideline or an organization exists that represents this area of care that you're working in, absolutely get in there and find out what they say, because not only does that give you the guidance, but then it's documented, and it's very easy to point to that as evidence about why you chose that as state-of-the-art, why your risk acceptability now is reasonable.
Wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned risk acceptability. We didn't get to talk about that, and I'm hoping in the discussion we can have more conversation about that. Benefit risk and risk acceptability, they are directly tied to state-of-the-art in many ways. So guys, I'm going to start inviting you now to participate. I know, Ed, you are already requesting to speak, so here you are. What I would say to you all, don't wait for your turn. We are not in a line here. If you are interested in participating, just raise your hand right now. I'll bring more than one person on the stage here, and we will have a good chat. So let's go with that. Ed, you are on. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Okay, Naveen, this is a great discussion. Chris, thank you for bringing it to the stage. And you correctly pointed to the definition of state-of-the-art in 14971, which when we developed that definition, there was no other definition anywhere. But the term was being used a whole lot. And as you pointed out, there's differences between bleeding edge and leading edge. State-of-the-art is not bleeding edge, which is what, as you pointed out, is the electronic world where they're thinking that way. The different devices and all that on the consumer electronics area. But where I wanted to go, and you brought it up, is the clinical practice, the state of the art in clinical practice. And one of the things that we found is it varies widely. And even in the U.S., company I was working for, when we started looking at those kinds of things years ago, we found that when we introduced a product onto the market, it was wise for us to do a limited release and to do it in small hospitals, medium size, and then the leading edge hospitals, and in different regions of the country, because we found the practice between the Northwest and the Southeast was different. So clinical practice is got a lot of issues that you have to deal with when you pull that into state-of-the-art. So you have to look at the markets you're intending to go into. So it varies country to country. And even in Europe, the MDR has tried to stabilize that, but there's still some variation between the 27 countries in the EC between how they practice medicine. So it's not a settled point of view. We've got a lot of work to do to get there, though. Yeah. So this is merely a beginning, and that's what we intended with the 2019 version of 14971, is to put something out there and see where it leads. Wonderful. So I'll stop now.
No, great points, Ed. Thanks for sharing that context with us. Claudia, you're on. Please share what you have in mind.
Thank you, Naveen. And Chris, great to reconnect with you in this venue.
So, Claudia, it's you.
Yeah. So I'll just share a little bit of what I'm experiencing developing an early state-of-the-art for a novel implantable device where there is no predicate. And I'll just be curious to hear comments. So this is a device, as I said, no legally marketed predicate. So I don't have the ability to pull, from an existing FDA product code, the MAUDE database. There are other devices that have not the same intended use, but are kind of in that greater space that I am looking at, okay, what is available for them in terms of, one is marketed in the U.S., so, I'm going to be looking at the MAUDE database for any complaints or any information there. What is available in publications? The standard of care actually for the clinical application for this novel device is actually benign neglect, non-surgical treatment, or for some segment of the patient population, use of donor tissue. So I was very interested in what you were talking about because I've got to weave all these things together to create an initial state-of-the-art that's going to continue to iterate as we continue with GLP preclinical, as we move into FDA IDE for an early feasibility study, and continue from there. So for me, I'm going to be saying, okay, what is this greater body of information that I can start to build that will iterate and be supplemented by data from our device, and then continuing to see what else is out there that I can continue to use to build a rationale and justification for what the standard of care and what the state of the art looks like for this novel device.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Chris, go ahead if you have some thoughts to share on that.
Yeah, well, Claudia, that sounds really exciting. And I think you started off by saying you're sort of establishing the state of the art for this. And it does sound like if it is a novel device, I would be asking myself, maybe I'm establishing the state of the art that I can compare to. I'm also sort of creating a new state of the art here. So to be honest, I haven't experienced that. So, and that's just exciting to hear that, Claudia. And yeah, I mean, maybe this is an example, one of those rare examples where, state of the art is not as, it's not going to offer as much as a novel device.
So with Chris and Claudia, on this point, would it make sense to now have more conversations early on in the Q-Sub process with the FDA and maybe decide together what would make sense for you?
Yes, and we've already had multiple Q-Subs with FDA because we do have FDA breakthrough designation.
Uh-huh.
And I believe this will be one of the upcoming Q-Subs because I'm also looking for how do we establish even initial risk acceptability criteria?
Uh-huh.
How does this early state-of-the-art, in whatever form we can create, going to feed into that? Because I haven't even gotten to, I've started like a hazard trace matrix.
Uh-huh.
And, I haven't gotten past like severities. And even with that, we're looking at the FDA product codes, what's happening, in the procedure and things like that. How do I even get to like the right side, even the beginning of the right side yet of that trace matrix?
Great. So in fact, it'll be very interesting to hear about this, once you have some success, figure it out, maybe it'll be a very good topic for discussion in a future session as well. So Claudia, I wish you all the best with that. I would want to now really invite
Naveen?
Yes, go ahead, Ed.
Maybe I could point Claudia to an example in that area. Because if you look at the history of the Jarvik heart, which was introduced and released by the FDA when it had a 40% mortality rate, because the patients with that would have a 70% mortality rate. So that was released. Within 3 months, a competing product came out with a 30% mortality rate, which made the Jarvik unacceptable at that point. So if you can go back and dig in the history of the Jarvik, there might be some information you could gain from that.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for bringing that on. All right, let's keep moving, guys. We have a little bit more time left. Bijan, you are on. Please share what you have in mind.
Hi, Naveen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Great.
Okay, great. Good discussion. And thanks for sharing your thoughts, Chris. One point that was brought up was about the variability in clinical practice in various parts of the world, country. And that, of course, affects the degree of risk. And state-of-the-art, of course, is strongly tied into risk and risk acceptability. So one of the ways that I could suggest to overcome this variability is to create a registry of clinical patients and who are in different geographies, so that means they would be exposed to different clinical practices. And from that, you can get an overall risk level, which would be, you can use as a better approximation of state-of-the-art.
That's an interesting point, Bijan. Is this something that you would develop in-house, or is something like that available for public?
Yeah, right. Registries can be done either privately by companies that make products or publicly by governmental agencies.
Okay.
Can both happen. And if you're a company that want to control which geographies you want to monitor, then you can say, for example, Northwest, Southeast, maybe Europe, Africa, whatever. And then look overall, because you will see that the level of risk will vary depending on which clinic is operating on using your device. And to find an overall average, then you can say, I've covered all the geographies that my product is going to be sold. I have a pretty good statistical sampling, and then I can derive a risk level that I can call state-of-the-art.
Oh, that is fantastic idea to share with our community here, Bijan. So I understand you now, which means that, just like we could look up FDA's website for product codes, we could also look up some publicly available registries that might be relevant to our device. Right?
Yeah.
That could be another way. Excellent. Florian, I'm so excited to see you, my friend. Great to have you here. Please unmute your mic and share what you have. I'm so excited to hear because you are in the clinical evaluation phase, clinical research phase. Would love to hear your thoughts on state of the art.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for the interesting topic today. And as you said correctly, I come from the clinical evaluation field. So I'm based in Germany, and we do lots of clinical evaluation projects for the EU LTR.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I wanted to pick up on what Bijan just said about the registries. So there are quite a few registries, especially on implants, orthopedic implants. That's how things mostly started. So that's really a very valuable source, I think. So I strongly agree with that. And thanks for bringing that up. And then the other thing, I just wanted to maybe give you an idea about what we do in clinical evaluation in Europe. And we are really strongly pushed by the new regulation, but not that new anymore, from 2017, but we are still working on helping manufacturers to transfer their documentation to the MDR requirements. And there is a very strong push to look at threshold values, at acceptance criteria in the clinical evaluation. And these acceptance criteria, especially for benefit risk, have to be based on the state of the art.
Mm-hmm.
So what we now usually do is that we do an intensive search for publications, for standards, for data from registries, clinical data from all kinds of sources, and based on that, try to develop these acceptance criteria. And then in clinical evaluation, we look at the data from the subject device and compare that to what we have elaborated based on state of the art. So state of the art is not only important for risk management, but also for clinical evaluation. And that has been really strongly pushed forward by the MDR.
Excellent. So that's a direct tie-in into risk acceptability and state of the art. So thanks for emphasizing that point, Florian. Guys, fascinating conversation as always, and we are running out of time. So I'm going to give just a couple of minutes to Chris for just processing his thoughts and synthesizing it in 2 or 3 key points that we can take away. In the meantime, I'm going to share with you just a couple of announcements. The first one is that the next week I will be hosting a webinar on post-market safety surveillance. If you're interested, reach out to me and I'll share with you the registration information. Second point here, and I can't emphasize this enough, as you have seen, this is our place, this is our community. We are connecting with each other and we have come to know each other through these conversations. I invite you to engage, be a part of this. If you're interested in these types of discussions, know that it happens every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. So you don't need an invitation actually. I post it on LinkedIn, but you can block your calendar for 11 a.m. Eastern. And I know you might be busy, you cannot attend all these sessions, so a recording of these conversations is available on my Let's Talk Risk website. You can find the link to that page on this event page here. The first, go to my Let's Talk Risk website on Substack and subscribe. With that, Chris, you're on. Please share just a couple of key takeaway points today.
Thanks, Naveen. Yeah, to keep it simple, I think some of the best advice that I ever learned about state of the art was check the FDA product code to see what's recognized for your device. That's a great starting point. And then also look at the other similar devices that are, you can compare your device to, or even just a portion of your device, if you can find something that might have some state of the art. And we just talked about risk acceptability criteria, and yeah, that's really helpful for establishing that in your risk management process. And then also look at what's being done in your target market. And I'm really glad, Ed, you brought up the variation across the market as well as you did earlier too, Naveen, because the usability testing process is great for uncovering what's state of the art and what is not being said in the published documents. And then, of course, Florian, I'm really glad you brought up clinical evaluation, because clinical literature is also great evidence to support state of the art. And a lot of that happens in the clinical evaluation process, which we do have to do for the US. It's just not in the same sort of codified format that the MBR gives us for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Guys, how do you feel about this discussion? Please show us some reaction using the emoji icons here. Let us know how you are feeling. And I know there are still many unanswered questions. So this is not the end of this conversation. We will tackle these topics in future sessions as well. Okay, I never say no to someone who raises their hand at the last moment. Somebody, Emmanuel, I think you were requesting to speak. If you are still interested, let me know. But I think I would like to wrap up very soon now. And thank you once again for joining. Thanks, Chris, for being a part of this discussion, giving us your time. And thanks, Claudia, Ed, Bijan, Florian, for contributing to this. This is why it works. It's not a webinar, not a lecture. It works because all of us are so willing to share our own unique perspectives. Thank you, guys, everyone. I look forward to seeing you once again next week. Bye-bye.